So recently we polled our audience. We wanted to find out how many of you guys compete. And it was about what we thought it would be. About 3/4 of the audience is really into this bodybuilding thing, but that competition thing isn't for them. I wasn't surprised at all by this because just looking at the ratio of the majority of the athletes I work with, it's usually on most years about 2/3 to 3/4 of the athletes that they're not competitive athletes. Again, this is like my one-on-one coaching, the Skypes we do, and I believe that you guys probably have similar ratios when you crunch everything together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which I think is important because a lot of people won't come looking for help from us because they're like, man, you know what? They only work with you if you're like already single-digit body fat, like just already really jacked, really strong. But that's the furthest thing from the case. We get a lot of everything. So I guess it's a good time to kind of go over how we would approach these situations differently compared to someone whose end goal is to get on that stage. And I think the listeners are going to find out that, okay, there's, a lot of differences, but at the same time, there's so many things that are, more so the same. As a matter of fact, I'd say a lot of my best competitive bodybuilders are usually athletes who started with no ambition to really compete. They're just going about their business. And all of a sudden, one day they're like, hey, like, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, coach, but I feel like I'm not too far away from that next step. So it definitely says there's something to that, to working in, I guess, this sort of, relaxed state of mind that I think more recreational bodybuilders tend to have. But there's other things as well. So I'll let you guys take over. What are the big differences when it comes to how you handle your recreational bodybuilders? And again, recreational doesn't mean like, hey, like you ain't serious about this. It just means you don't want to do that last thing and your competitive bodybuilders. Brian, what do you do differently?
Yeah. So I think when somebody applies that doesn't list, any aspirations for competing, the first thing we have to do is meet them where they're currently at. And that's true even if it's an aspiring competitor. A lot of like when I'm putting myself back in my shoes when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to compete, but it was always, okay, I need to gain more muscle. I need to gain more muscle. And sometimes we get those athletes, that regardless of whether or not they want to compete, most people are coming to us to improve body composition. And so, or, compete in powerlifting. So with that said, I think there's times where it becomes very evident that, okay, we need to put this person in a long-term, gaining phase. But there's situations where, the flip side is true, where we might have somebody inquire that just wants to improve body comp, and the first thing we need to do is, get some fat loss taken care of. And we have competitors that will apply, and that's still the first thing that maybe sometimes we should do. So I think regardless of what you apply for, you're going to get the same treatment out of the gate. Like we still have to meet you where you're at and go from there. Because I think there's a lot of similarities, like you said. I think with, aspiring competitors, they're focused more kind of on the fat loss side of things. They're thinking kind of forward towards contest prep, and it might take some time to get to that point. And for the non-competitor, it's, it can go either way. And so with these situations, I think it's just important to understand that each athlete is a little bit different. And sometimes it takes some hard discussions, with what you're trying to get out of them as an athlete. And managing expectations is sometimes part of that. So, I think there's a lot of similarities though, especially with like initial fat loss. And I know we talked about this a bit before the call, but I think people that are I think there's more similarities than differences. I'll say that. But people that are competing, that are entering a fat loss phase, usually it's like, we don't need to go like full Tupperware meal plan mode, like they don't need to be like completely militant with everything, even if they're a competitor out of the gate, especially if there's an open-ended timeline. So I think for me, that's kind of something we can talk more about too, is what if it's a non-competitor with a deadline. It's like, okay, I want to look good for a cruise in August or whatever. That can kind of change how you approach things too. So I think just the fact that there's a deadline with a contest prep, things you tend to have a little bit less wiggle room, but at some point there's significantly less. But out of the gate, I think we treat them pretty similarly.
I think the thing you said, Berto, about how when the recreational lifters, it's a little bit more of a relaxed setting because they don't have this super hyper-focused goal of getting on stage, that the environment to progress in it's just a lot easier. It's more enjoyable too. So that's something like when I meet with people for the first time, even with contest preppers, I'm trying to create an environment where we can make progress, where it's obviously you're doing well, you're going towards your goals, but it's enjoyable. And also taking into consideration life context, like what's this person's situation like, family life, school life, whatever. Like how can we make the process as smooth as possible? But you have to figure out with each person as far as like what makes them click. Where they're at, like Brian said, where they're at as far as their skill set. Are they new to dieting? Are they experienced dieters? Are they new to training or not? So, based off of like what you gather in that first conversation, of course you got to set, protocol up to where, you're going to get as much progress as you can, not just physically, but also the mental side, the emotional side, and, in a sense, just creating really good habits. So like for me personally, as a coach, those are the things that I try to focus on the most, is like big picture stuff, like trajectory. Like what is the goal? Most people's goals, whether you're competing or not, it's going to be, like Brian said, body composition. Everybody wants to get bigger and wants to be leaner. So it's like setting trajectory is probably the first step. Like, okay, is this going to be a year process? Is it a 2-year process? Is it a 5-year process? And you kind of like, once you kind of establish like what that timeline might look like, if it's a 5-year process, that more times than not, it's going to require a lot of like skill building, and not just in the weight room, like with everything. Whereas someone who's maybe a little more advanced, it might take them a year to kind of change that body composition that I want. So it's more about just figuring each person out where they're at and then kind of going from there. But I think like me, like Brian, like the similarities I think is more so than the differences between like prep and just, in a sense, the recreational lifter. The only thing I think the differences for me would be just the extremism, because now we're talking like most people, neighborhood of 12, 15%, that's your recreational lifter. You're going to look decent. You're going to feel really good energy. You can manage, life settings really well at that body composition. But contest prep, now we're getting down to like single digits. And oftentimes, we're talking maybe 6%, 7%. On rare occasions, maybe even a touch below that. And that's a whole nother animal. So yeah, that's kind of where my thought is right now on that.
See, I think what competitive or bodybuilders who aspire to be competitive bodybuilders, they kind of sign off on, they consent on, is the fact that anytime you go from recreational to competitive, you're kind of, to some extent, not that this is the goal, but like safety is a little bit less of a concern, right? So someone who has a goal of squatting 700 pounds, it's like, if you could just squat 4 plates, like that's a pretty strong dude, like life would be a lot simpler. But like this person wants to push to that, but they understand that. They're like, damn, this weight could staple me if something goes wrong. And the same thing with competitive bodybuilding. It's like when, you decide that, okay, I want to go up on that stage, maybe a little body dysmorphia, like that might a transient, like about with disordered eating. It's like, yes, coach, I read the Minnesota starvation experiment and now I still want to do this. Let's go. So sometimes because they are so anxious to get there, they don't want to work on the little bottlenecks that end up impeding them on the way to the stage. And this is precisely why a lot of recreational bodybuilders end up being better bodybuilders, because they are in no rush to fix those asymmetries, which are mostly mental. Asymmetries is probably in the lead. Like something up here is going to bottleneck us at some point. Lifestyle asymmetries as well. Party too much on the weekends. This job's way too stressful. Things of that nature. And the recreational bodybuilder, because they're just more inclined to having a more holistic outlook on the situation, they're more likely to be like, yeah, okay, maybe we should only party once a week. I mean, most guys that want to compete aren't big partiers anyways, but they skip out on other things is what I'm saying. They're reckless in other ways typically because they're not afraid of the task at hand. They want to get there tomorrow in some cases. Whereas, again, a lot of recreational folks, it just gets to the point where it's like, hey, they took all the right remedial courses. They did all the small things, not just when it comes to physique, but again, like those bottlenecks that we constantly see. And then it's like, shoot, like before you know it, it's like, hey, next time you cut, if we lost 7% of your body weight on top of that, like you'd probably be shredded, dude. It's a very easy transition is what it ends up being. And I just see that happen way too often, that my recreational bodybuilders are like, hey, like, let's go for this. And most of the time I'm like, because I don't bring it up, I'm like, I wanted to say something, but I didn't say something. And it's the exact opposite sometimes with like the guys that like want to be out of the box competitive bodybuilders. It's like, bro, I don't care if you just saw Christian Guzman's like last little summer shredded series. It's like, you cannot compete next year. You've never even had abs in your life, dude. Like you've never dieted for more than 6 weeks. It's like, we have some things to do. So quite often the Recs end up being better competitive bodybuilders. But there's also a subset of people that like legit respect, I guess, the risk that come with doing anything competitively. And they're like, no, I just kind of rather squat my 400 pounds, like leave it here. And like, this is good and plenty. And I have a lot of respect for those people as well, because it's kind of built in human nature to get a little bit and then just want more and more and more and more. I mean, we all know this. We're never big enough, never lean enough, so on and so on. So, have you guys experienced the same where like a lot of your recs, it's like, man, like I wish a lot of my competitive bodybuilders were just as mindful as you guys, just as aware as you guys?
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that. I mean, there's obviously some exceptions, but it does seem like I've had a lot of people that have brought the idea of competing to me rather than, after I've started working with them, rather than out of the gate. And you're right. I think usually it's something they've been probably thinking about for a while, but just kind of in a holding pattern, trying to decide. Like by the time they bring it up to me, I feel pretty confident that they're mentally prepared for it because they've probably done their homework, And so, and yeah, I think that it is kind of the opposite sometimes, where you get people that are, can't swim that are jumping off the diving board, So it can be kind of bad at times. So, with those people, we meet them where they're at, and I like to just like, okay, what's the first step, and what constraints are there to us getting to this initial short-term goal? And universally, I think for a lot of people, it's the behavioral side of things. It's not the X's and O's of programming. It's not their macro split. It's just understanding that there's habits that need to be in place before this is even something that can be entertained. And I think the people, the recreational people, because they take a more holistic approach to things, they're able, they don't have that black and white mentality that sometimes competitors are susceptible to having, where it's like, okay, I've been very on point, militant, and then they might binge. These people are kind of oftentimes better at handling life as it comes their way. They're focused on goals, and it's not this, there's not as much guilt associated with straying a little bit off course here and there, because they know they don't have a deadline they're working towards, like as far as like a show date. And I think that's valuable, because I think it allows you to realize that, the wheels don't fall off and you're able to keep going. So I think it's not uncommon for them to have a more sustainable, I think, healthy outlook towards the process. I think you're right there.
I had one gentleman, he's like, when I started working with him, he was 60. And his main objective was just to be healthy. And before I started working with him, he was eating probably a little too he wasn't eating that much, let's say. And he just wasn't really developed as much as he probably could be. So in a sense, kind of chronically over dieted. So just spending some time, giving him permission to eat more, teach him how to train properly. And, all his health markers improved. His physique started to change for the better, a little more muscle mass, body composition looked decent. He was already fairly lean when I started because he was dieted. And it ended up turning into a contest prep, about a year later. And here we are, like 2 contest preps later. And like a couple of masters class wins, and just, a really good bodybuilder now. And, he finally got his off season this year because he competed 2 seasons in a row, and he's wanting to do it again. But what turned into like, hey, I just want to be healthy and live a better life, turned into like, now I'm competing. So he's got the best of both worlds now. Like, he knows how to manipulate his body how he sees fit, because now he has all kinds of tools, because now we're talking 2 or 3 years of working together. So he can, like, if he really wanted to, he can do this on his own. And he's got tools to, go either way, be recreational or be competitive. But I don't think if we would have started from, hey, we're going to do a show out the gates, like from where he started from, I don't think that would have been very productive. It would probably have been counterproductive, because it would have instilled some probably crazy behaviors that we know this sport can generate. So that's one example that I can give. And I have another athlete that I'm currently working with where it's kind of similar. It was almost opposite. It was, trying to get her to be okay with eating more food and putting some muscle on, and, kind of getting rid of some, food focus, obsession type stuff. And that was like a year and a half, 2-year process. And she improved her physique just through building muscle, and looked better with more muscle, even though the body fat was higher than she did prior with less muscle and less body fat. And we've been cleaning things up here as of late, and it turned into a contest prep, because all her behaviors that she had in the past that weren't really conducive, towards competitive bodybuilding, we basically fixed that by not dieting. So she's in far more command and control of her behaviors now, even through this process that we're going through now. And I have no fear of her like finishing it all the way to the end, like actually getting to a little bit lower body fat levels because of, all the tools that she's worked on over the last couple of years. That's a couple examples of like how like this recreational thing can turn into more of a competitive side to it.
Yeah, I think you're right too. I think if they would have applied with the intent to compete in their application, it probably wouldn't have gone as well, because it would have been, it would have been a rude awakening, I think.
Like with my second example, like if she said, I want to compete, I would have probably said no. Like, it's just way too many red flags there. Like, there's a lot of groundwork that we need to do before you can get to that point. So, yeah.
whenever I get an application that is inquiring about contest prep, it almost always makes me feel a little uneasy because I'm like, man, am I going to have to go play the bad guy today? But that's not really what I'm trying to do. Like if anything, like I've had discourse with athletes where they're like, but I really want to do this. And I'm like, well, like I need to tell you this because I can't just let you go. I wouldn't feel like morally fully intact if I didn't tell you that to some extent, if someone didn't make you wait so long, like they don't really give a fuck about you, basically. But it's like I have to say my piece because quite often, again, people are so like enamored with like what these like shredded physiques look like, but what goes on behind the highlight film, it isn't really pretty. Like it's not. It's got some dark built-in features that unless you've been there, you just wouldn't understand. Whereas like with, again, like the recreational athletes, this is kind of turning into like why we love our Recreational Athletes podcast, is that via the routes they take, they almost like built in like these safety nets, like where it's like, hey, like worst case for this guy, let's assume he's 6 feet tall. It's like, hey, your safety nets have you set up so that if you fall, you're 190 pounds and like 15% body fat. Like that's where your baseline habits go because you took this more holistic approach where you were working on all those little holes you needed to fill out. And if this bodybuilding thing doesn't work out or it kind of throws you off for a minute there, it's like you'll kind of reset and gravitate back towards that. Whereas for a lot of the guys, it just right out the gates, it's like bodybuilding. And even if they are successful and they bring a pretty good physique to the stage, it's like they really only know how to speak that language. And then whenever they are in these floaty periods in life, they just have a hard time keeping up with it. So I think that is probably the best part about my rec lifters is that I know that if life gets crazy, they can only train 2 times a week, that because they allowed me to be so patient with them, they know what the big rocks are and they understand that it's not about being perfect day in and day out. Just like, you know, if you go to the gym like once a week for a year, it's like, okay, that might do something, but it's not going to do a whole lot past a certain point. It's not what you do sometimes, it's what you do chronically. A lot of the rec lifters, I think, understand that better than my competitive folks that are way too much, or they're hyper focused on being optimal and perfect and as militant as can be. So yeah, it's crazy. It's like, I guess the best way to describe how we handle our rec bodybuilders compared to our competitive bodybuilders, the rec bodybuilders just kind of get it out of our way a little bit. Like they're better not getting in our way. And to be quite frank, I guess I wish some of my bodybuilders with competitive aspirations would allow me to take the more scenic route instead of a crash course when it comes to certain aspects of generating the initial parts of their bodybuilding journeys.
Like how many Monday through Friday bodybuilders do we have, right? Monday through Friday, you know, because most people work jobs. So everything's fairly routine Monday through Friday. And the weekend, it's like, okay, you're out with family, you're out doing dates, you're out doing whatever. So you're not as committed on the weekends, but yet these people still, over time, change body composition without all the stressors of having like a contest prep. And then when it does turn into like, hey, I think I can do this thing, sometimes I'll get like, okay, what do we need to do different? I'm like, nothing. Like you got all these good habits established. You know, we can basically just keep rinsing and repeating what you're doing. We'll continue to make progress. If we start to see a little plateau, then we'll run an audit. You know, is it the weekends holding us back? You know, or can we keep the weekends like that? Maybe we can do something a little different Monday through Friday. So in a sense, that person has like a system, like their system that they've been running with. So to me, it's like the competition thing. Sometimes, like you said, Alberto, it's just like that hyper focus gets so high that we have to, like, people think we need to be like over the top rigid, but it's more about picking your spots like a good boxer. You know, you throw a good punch, back out, don't get hit. You know, it's like you learn to bob and weave. So the recreational lifters, like the Monday through Friday people, like they're covering big rocks. They're still eating their protein. They're still lifting with intent. Chances are they're probably getting a little more recovery just because the weekends they're a little more free. And the stress, the environment's, it's not that stressful in comparison to a competitive bodybuilder.
Yeah, they do a better job just building the strategy around their life.
Yes.
You know, rather than
Yep.
Which I think is important.
Because sometimes the competitive bodybuilders, you're trying to get things out of them. You know, you're like, let me make this easier for you because I have a hunch this is exactly what's going on. But they won't tell you. They're like, no, I got this, coach. I got this, coach. Like, I can still, like, even though they've been missing training sessions chronically of late, let's just say, it's like, no, coach, like, let's keep it at 5. Let's keep it at 5. Don't bring me down to 4. Whereas the recreational bodybuilders, they tend to, it's more because the last leg in customization is always going to be the athlete. But you can't do that if you don't know, like, what's going on. What are some of our obstacles, challenges that we're dealing with right now? So because of that, yeah, you can program something that tends to be more sustainable. And I think people, when they think of sustainable, they think like this training block. They think about like from here until the prep, maybe the first 2 preps. But in reality, like sustainable is like, we've seen so many people who've started doing this, and then like 5 years later, they're like nowhere to be found. Like sustainable to me is like rest of your life is what I'm basically talking about here. And it having more reason outside of just like, you know, I want the likes and the trophies, basically. So yeah, the recreational lifters, I can have that sort of dialogue where it's like, okay, is this too much right now? Or is this too little? And I know that the answers that I'm getting from them are going to be honest ones, whereas sometimes the recreational bodybuilders, you know, they want to, I mean, it's kind of built into the culture, you know, like they want to come off as robots, and they're like, no, coach, I got this. And reality, they don't. And at some point that breaks.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in for our annual mid-year/mid bodybuilding season call for athletes who want to compete next season in 2024. Every year without fail, we get people who contact us in January looking to compete sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. And 99% of the time, we have to turn them away, or we have to convince them they need to wait another year before stepping on stage as a 3DMJ athlete. This is because natural competitive bodybuilding cannot be a rushed job. There's a long-term strategy and process to making every contest prep pay off, and we're in the business of building athletic careers. We are not in the business of crash diets, quick transformations, or creating disordered eating behaviors. It's our mission to provide our athletes with the best possible chance of success, and to do that, we have time-intensive systems. Once you submit an application, it'll likely take 2 to 6 weeks before you have your initial onboarding video call with your 3DMJ coach. They'll likely run you through an initial block or 2 of baseline training and nutrition to build a relationship and learn your body. You'll likely have a contest prep positioning phase or a diet before the diet, and then there will likely be a small maintenance phase as well before the actual contest prep diet home stretch finally initiates. In short, we don't do 12-week rapid transformations. We build educated athletes for the long haul, and that takes time. All that's to say, if you're looking to compete in 2024, you need to hop on our rosters as soon as possible. To do that, go to 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching. There, you'll find a summary of our procedures and pricing, and links to specific FAQ pages to help you learn more about what to expect. Again, that's 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching to check out our info pages and get yourself signed up. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the show.
What about the recreational lifter that's, let's say, a little too non-compliant?
That
Like,
can happen, yes.
How do you guys like give them like the proper nudge? Because now, like, I don't know, more times than not, like the reason for adherence is they like to eat, they like to socialize, maybe they like to drink or whatever. Like there's always like something there that's preventing them from adhering. So how do you kind of have that conversation that there needs to be, like, if you want to attain this goal that you have of changing body composition, because that's everybody's goal. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably want to gain more muscle and lose body fat. Like, how do you get them towards that? There's going to be some type of sacrifice.
I think that's one of the more challenging jobs, to be honest. It's I'd like to say I had like a super high success rate with that, but it can be hit or miss. I mean, I try to, first identify, okay, what is the issue here? And, usually it's a combination of things, but, the diet is probably the biggest thing, especially with fat loss. Like it's very easy to close a deficit without trying, and sometimes what's the and I know we've all had this conversation, the awkward conversation of like, okay, your data on your nutrition sheet, would lead me to believe we would be making significant progress here. And so like we've been doing it long enough where we know what's outside the realm of an outlier, and so there's situations where it's like, okay, we need to have the conversation of, actual like underreporting and how easy it is for that to happen even without realizing it, and, not placing blame on the individual. And I think in some cases where I've had success with this, it's just a matter of continuing to educate them on that specifically. And, for most people, I think it's more rare, for me anyway, to get people that are skipping training than it is diet, because most people enjoy the training more than dieting, so
I do.
Yeah, I definitely do as well. So it's, yeah, I think the bottleneck for those individuals is oftentimes just the adherence and discipline, and there's only so much flexibility you can build into a plan. You're especially, remotely, like you're not going to be going through their refrigerator like you see like on those The Biggest Loser or whatever, scolding them, and like that's not what we do. So there's I think it's a matter of education and just on their end understanding that there's going to be sacrifices that are inevitably going to need to occur in order to get to where they want to go. But it doesn't have to mean a bodybuilding contest prep either.
See,
Do you ever like this? I'll say, do you ever like the conversation turns into like kind of like, let's talk about the goal again? Like, let's maybe reestablish the goals. Maybe it's at this particular point in time, maybe it's not feasible to go where we want to go. Maybe we have to kind of take a pause, work on some other things. So changing expectations, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you have a goal that you're, for whatever reason, falling short of on a routine basis, like that damages your self-efficacy, so just switching goals and being in a position where you don't feel like you're ending each day falling short of what you were supposed to do, I think is important psychologically for people. And so putting them in a position where they feel like they have momentum before anything dials up in terms of fat loss, I think is important.
That was a good pivot, Jeff, because I think the first half of this conversation was what competitive bodybuilders can learn from recreational bodybuilders. And I think now it's kind of flipped the other way around, where we will, I forgot about those guys, those rec bodybuilders that are like, this bodybuilding thing looks cool. Like, give it a try, hire a coach. Here we go. It's going to happen. And it's like, dude, like, you're going to have to be an active participant in this process. Like, it doesn't stop with basically hiring me. And because there is no competition deadline, at no point are they going to be up on stage in front of all these people wearing very little clothes. It's, it can kind of become a whatever sometimes. And I think, first of all, you start off with, and you hinted at this, Jeff, like, why are you doing this? Like seriously, why? Like, let's get to the root of why you're doing this. Because things that are really your goals, things that you like really want, you just wake up with this very intrinsic drive to get those things done. I think we've all felt that at some point where we just feel so compelled to do the work that, you know, to other people, it's like, where's this energy coming from? Like, how do you keep showing up? And it's like, I don't realize what I'm doing. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's what, like, things that are of high priority to you should feel like, especially once you've really reasoned that, like, this, you've outlined your whys quite clearly to yourself. So I think you get to the root of that, because maybe what they're looking for, I don't know, like we can do it through like running or something else. And then I wouldn't be the right coach for that. So the whys have to be reestablished. Like, let's really get into that. And then I think secondly, like, this is where like the broiest of bros have it right. And I'm gonna let the cat out the bag, but like Brian's been meal prepping lately. He sent me a picture. Jeez.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that.
I don't know how I feel about that yet, but there is some truth to the fact that, like, every time you eat one of your little Tupperwares, it's like a W. It's like there is no. So actually, I feel good about that, Jeff. Like, it's like here's your little W. It's like you don't have to think about what you're going to eat, because like decision making sometimes, like, we have enough of those to make. So this is where I'd start to borrow things from like bros, where it's like, okay, like from now on, like even if it's like 2 times a week, because I'm having a hard time having this inconsistent recreational bodybuilder make it to the gym 3 times, these 2 hours a day, it's like these 2 slots, like twice a week, like they're just out of bounds. Like, you can't schedule anything there. Like, this is your boundary. Like you have to be protective of that time slot the same way that, I don't know, like Dorian Yates was about his training window, right? And the same thing with like little systems, like with the meal prep, where it's just like, all right, like dinner can be whatever, but your first 2 meals of the day, let's say this person eats 3 again, it's like they're already pre-made. You just do them. And then at the end of the day, you're going to feel super good because, like, hey, you said no to the coworkers that wanted to go out to, you know, do whatever after work, but you have to go train. You got your 2 meals at home, and now you're here sitting at home enjoying dinner with the family, and like it's a win. And that sort of stuff, like, builds momentum. Like you see that, damn, I can get stuff done. So usually for those folks, it's like, I'm going to take a page out of like the very regimented bodybuilders out there, and not overwhelm them. And it's like, okay, from now on, like you're living like AJ Morris, bro. No, like, but we'll pick 1 or 2 things that AJ does, and it's like, this is what you're doing. And if you do this consistently over the course of the week, we had a damn good week. And then we just keep adding and adding more as once they kind of like dominate those areas of their life. But yeah, you can't have the floaty ones because they're not competitive. They think they can just run around doing whatever. And eventually you have to let them know, they're like, bro, like you're just paying me to like watch you just dance in circles, basically.
Yeah. I think for a lot of those individuals, like many of them are interested for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I think it's just once it's overcoming that initial like inertia of a deficit, you know, and it's like, wow, this sucks. This is a lot more work than I thought it would be. And so, you know, the 3 preps, you know, contest season that I've done, you know, 2 of them have been, you know, pretty diverse in terms of food selection, you know, and you know, there's probably only a handful of days that were the exact same. But I also had more time and more mental bandwidth at those seasons to be able to like, okay, what do I want to eat for lunch? Rather than like, okay, I've got 15 minutes. I need to go put something together that's conducive for my goals. And so I think having, you know, meal prepping, like that's not the end goal necessarily for a lot of these people, but it can get them that initial momentum where they're not having to think too much. And then from there, it's like you can kind of peel it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think that's something that, you know, the like traditional kind of bro bodybuilding community does well. And at the same time, they don't do well because sometimes they're, they're also like, okay, if I ran out of meal 3, like, what am I going to do? And then they end up missing a meal rather than eating or whatever, So, yeah, I think there's a lot that can be learned on both sides for sure.
It's like like my son, he's off for school. He's got 2 more days. He's got to go back to school. So his routine obviously changed. So before it was like very regimented and routine. Monday to Friday, he knows he's got to get up a certain time. He's got to get ready for school. He goes to school. He comes home. He has a certain schedule and routine after school and so on. And what I noticed between the differences between summer and school is summer, it's not as regimented. There's a lot more flexibility in it. So you can kind of see the stability in him. Like when he's at school, he's like his demeanor, like he's not as stressed. He's more calm. He's like, he kind of just knows, okay, this is what I got to do. Whereas the summer, it's always like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Where do we go? What do I have to do? It's like, so it's just not as stable, So having a good structure in place, whether that's a meal plan, maybe to just take you from point A to point B before you can graduate going to point C, having that consistency there, it's going to breed like a lot more stability and confidence. And if you're following through and you're consistent with it, you're bound to see some progress. And when you see progress, what does that lead to? More motivation, your desire to keep doing it. So it's kind of like you said, Berto, it's like generating some momentum, but it has to start with like setting up some type of structure. And that structure could look different. Like going back again to the Monday through Friday bodybuilder, like there's a good routine in place Monday through Friday. The weekend may be a little less predictable, but at least 5 out of the 7 days, you're more or less kind of like moving towards the goal, as long as day 6 or 7 isn't like too crazy.
Yeah, it's a good point with kids. I've noticed that too with mine is once school starts, it's like everything is just a lot smoother just in the house. Like I'm more efficient with things, because I can kind of get into a more predictable routine.
Yep.
And yeah, I think when it comes to, the motivation aspect, like that's a byproduct of structure and action. It doesn't usually precede that.
Exactly.
And I think that's something, if people are motivated, just start and you'll be surprised at how much you can accomplish, assuming you can get some success out of the gate. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I was joking with our neighbor a little while ago how when I was a kid, like I would look forward to summer vacation, count down the days, and now like as a parent, it's kind of opposite. It's like now I'm counting down the days till school starts so I can just have a more streamlined schedule. But no, it's funny.
So you get kind of the best of both worlds. If you start out a little bit more like a recreational bodybuilder, you kind of learn to be a little bit more flexible because you don't have as many constraints. But then when you're a competitive bodybuilder, you learn to be like more rigid, and it teaches you, about discipline, follow through. So it's like if you can kind of marry the two, then I think I could confidently say this, that you'll get more like all three of us, because we're kind of at that point now where we can be very flexible and we can be very rigid at the same time.
Yeah, ideally, like that's how you should do the bodybuilding thing. You come in as a recreational bodybuilder. Like a lot of people who go the patient route with me, they will actually, in hindsight, or once we get a few things done, they're like, damn, you know what? I look pretty good. I'm having an easy time balancing everything. I don't think I want to compete anymore. Like this is perfect, because they also understand, because we've talked about like all the things that might happen, that will happen when you do prep, and they're like, no, I'm jacked. I'm like, I got my little abs, I got a little quad vein, like this is good and plenty for me. So yeah, I don't know. I think at the end, and this is kind of what made me feel a bit uneasy about this podcast, is that everyone's path is so different, especially when we're talking about recreational bodybuilders, because for competitive bodybuilders, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, hey, they want to make it to that stage. With recreational folks, it's like, man, like the gates are wide open. Like I think about how would my training look like if I didn't want to compete anymore? If it wasn't high on my priority list, I'm like, man, I think I'd probably run a marathon at some point the next 5 years. I'd probably golf. I don't know, but there'd be other things that I would do concurrently along with like my training. So, again, like as a recreational bodybuilder, there's just so many ways to be a bodybuilder. Like it's not just the stage. I find them to be some of the most interesting projects I get to work with, because the competitive stuff, it's like, I know what the curriculum looks like. I know what this person needs. Hopefully they agree with me, because I really do think they need to do it in this order and this is the timeline. But with the recreational folks, I don't know, like you have a sumo wrestler, Brian, right?
I do.
So
I do. Yeah, that's actually that. I'm glad you brought that up, because he wasn't a sumo wrestler when I started. But yeah, he was, a recreational, we can say bodybuilder, just a non-competitor, just wanted to improve body comp. And so he's, it's been cool. Like he'll send me videos of his matches and everything. And, he competes as like a lightweight, and that was one conversation we had to have, because I think, when people think sumo wrestling, they think like, okay, if bigger is better, and so now I think he's starting to, he's always respected the technical side, but I think he's truly appreciating, like, I think he went to a tournament and like the lightest guy there, like smoked everybody. So it's like, okay, now there's a large like technical element that I can grow significantly in, and he's loving it. So it's yeah, that I never thought I'd be working with a sumo wrestler, but it's been pretty fun.
So yeah, things like that, man. Like that's I think the best part about the recreational bodybuilders. They want to make this a part of their life and enhance their life, like right off the gate. Like, and like for us, we have to learn the hard way eventually that we want to do this competitive thing, and we realize that, oh wow, like this is kind of taken away, right? Like we've all had that talk with ourselves, and then we kind of eventually flip the switch a little bit and try to like find that balance. Whereas a lot of recreational folks, they got it right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point with the recreational athletes being, we're able to help them more out of the gate, because somebody that applies for prep, in the back of their mind, like they're not going to be like their success to them is getting on stage and doing well, which could be 3-4 years down the road for some of them. And so it's, I think, harder for them to enjoy that process and how long it can take to unfold. Mm-hmm. Whereas, the recreational athlete, it's easy pretty much out of the gate. It's like, oh, wow, this is enhancing my life, and we're only a few weeks in. So I think that's important. I did want to mention, Bert, you had sent me a video a while back of some guys playing cornhole on ESPN, and you said that you're very confident that within 5 years you could be a professional cornhole player. You did say that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I could, like, the gene pool is really small. Like, I look at these guys and I'm like, no, I can handle that. And the purses are better than in natural bodybuilding. So yeah, I can see it. Obviously I understand marketing a little bit, so I'd be doing my press conferences shirtless, and sex sells. But which is crazy, right? Cornhole, like in regards to finances.
Marathon or cornhole competition. Could be one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess while we're here, it's like recreational bodybuilders, like if you're interested in working with us, like don't shy away from that, simply because, they look at dudes like Dirk, which, by the way, Dirk was recreational forever. Like we've been working for 7.5 years, close to 8 actually. And for the longest time, it was like, let's just work on the things I need to work on, basically. And like, here we are now. Like one day it's just dawned on him that like, hey, I think I want to finally give this a try. So yeah, just because you see some of our athletes that like stand out, or maybe even the coaches, like give us an interesting case. Like maybe we'll get another sumo wrestler.
Yeah.
We'll have our guys battle it out is what we'll do.
Yeah.
Jeffrey?
One last thing I think we hit on, and then we can probably call it a day. So as far as the recreational lifter and progress is concerned, because I think people out there are going to think, well, if I'm recreational, I'm not going to make as much progress as a competitive bodybuilder. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
That's a really, I'm glad you brought that
I can
up.
only train 3 days a week, or I can only train 4 days a week or 2 days a week in comparison to someone who's maybe training 5 or 6.
I think with most successful competitors, there is absolutely a level of structure and consistency that is required above and beyond like what a recreational competitor would have. But that point that is necessary is further down the road than most realize. So, like I think before the call, Jeff, you had mentioned like the pre-prep fat loss. They're not managed much differently, between competitors and non-competitors. We're putting them in a reasonable deficit and we're letting time do its thing, and we're trying to be as consistent as we can. But there is, I think sometimes I wonder if people listen to the podcast and think like, oh, that's nice. They care about our emotional well-being, but like I'm more hardcore than that. Like I'm good. Like I don't need to hear this. I'm ready to jump in. But part of that is like you have to have that skill set in order to be able to be successful with a prep. So it's I think something that we instill in all of the athletes. And I don't think progress necessarily suffers, and I mean 2-3 times a week in many cases, you can either be a competitive bodybuilder that wants to train 6 days a week and can only train 2, and you can fail at that, or you can just accept, oh, I can train twice a week. That's what is doable, and just commit and be okay with that and still see good progress, So it's like, I think we try to optimize the progress for regardless of the situation. It's just meeting the people where they're at, and the path to get there is sometimes a little bit different.
On that note, with us being mindful and aware of people's like mentals, like when it comes to a very hardcore sport, one thing that kills me about like the anti-fragility camp is like you could only be anti-fragile like if you understand like what your soft spots are, like, and a lot of those folks, they just think they're going to live a certain way and never really take care of like those soft spots. So again, with the Recs, like they understand that like, hey, maybe you shouldn't have ice cream in your house. Maybe it should be something like whatever. On that note, Jeff, like the whole who makes more progress, I think it's a tortoise and the hare sort of deal where like time is the great equalizer. For most competitive bodybuilders, what ends up happening is there's just a lot of crimes of passion along the way where they get in their own way somehow. And I think that's what ends up holding them back at the end. Whereas the folks that tend to do this in a more like relaxed state, like this isn't my whole life. It's very important. It's my hobby. I love this. I watch all the podcasts. I know all the bodybuilders, but it's like in its right order of priorities. They tend to do better like in the long term. Like we know a lot of folks that, well, I know a lot of folks, a lot of bodybuilders that as I've seen them kind of age out going into their 40s, I can see that it was a lot of the dumb stuff they did like throughout their 20s where it's like, man, like bro's like falling apart at this point, and I can look back and tell you why, or like I think if you go back even another generation, like you will see a lot of folks that back when bodybuilding was like ultra restrictive when it comes to like the way people eat, it's like now their bodybuilding career is over and they look like little Kirby Puckets, basically. They look like little meatballs everywhere they go. So yeah, I think at the end, it's very individual, but that you'd be surprised as to what some recreational bodybuilders are able to get out of them. Like I do have a few that they're like no interest in competing, none at all, but like they probably get asked that question all the time in the gym.
I have nothing to add to that because I agree with both of you guys. Yeah. I just decided I'm going to be a recreational bodybuilder. I'm stopping my prep right now.
Sounds so much better, don't it? All right. Well, Rex and competitive bodybuilders alike, thank you for joining us. I do have one question. If people made it this far, I should have started out with this. For the recreational bodybuilders out there, what's stopping you from competing in most cases? That's an interesting, I think we'd get a mixed bag of results there.
Yeah, that would be a good poll question for sure.
That's it. Signing off.
All right. Thank you.